Hello, Legend of the Samurai here with another Japanese dimple lock. This is the Lockman MegaCross SP. This is specifically an upgraded version of one of their older locks. It looks very similar to the old MegaCross, but the main bitting, which corresponds to this left row here, has significantly wider cuts for the key pins because they have totally changed how they deal with that set of 5 pins. It's still 5 pins on the left and then 4 pins coming in from the top right, and the changes that they have made cause this to be a much more difficult lock to pick in most cases, and some of them I have found can be arbitrarily difficult. So we'll see if we can get this one open using a snug fitting tensioner because I need very good control over the plug. And I'll start on the top right with a hook because there are some overset traps now on the left and you need to not overlift these pins. So, one, two, 4, 3, and got a nice good false set going, so I think those are dealt with. I will switch over to a flag, and 1 is good, and 2 feels good because I will have hit it with the hook as I went past, but it will drop back, and it will continue to do so. So I know I need to go back to 5. Alright, and then 1 drops back. Check, yeah, 5 is good. Now number 2. And now I have a nice deep false set. And I actually have to keep picking pin 2 to get back to this false set, otherwise I have no chance at all of setting the remaining pins. So that's 1, 2. 5 is good. Now I will go after 4. So I initially get some counter rotation off the pick, and then I lose all feedback entirely, and I have to manually counter rotate while tapping. 2 just dropped. There we go. So one of the risks is 4 loves to overset. Drop back slightly. Now if I pick 2 again. Alright, I lost that false set, which means I probably lost 5. Yep. Go back for that. Hit 1 again. Hit 2 again. Try once more for 4. That's 1, 2. I think I have 4 and 5 now. Should just be 3, which is maximum lift. Okay, now hopefully 2 just dropped back. And we're open. And even though these are 2 separate rows, they are offset, and they are also different sized pins. So you can go full circle. Now, to get this apart, start with a couple of screws up front. And this is an LA format. Which comes apart in a somewhat unconventional fashion. There's a cap, and then this slides out the back, and it has a carrier. Now if we undo 2 more screws on the back, can take off the tailpiece, and then it has what amounts to a little key and knob type cylinder that rides in this carrier. And these covers are normally crimped on. There's a little fold at both ends, so I've removed one of those ends. Warning, on the top right ones, that rear chamber is a very strong ball bearing detent. So that spring will attempt to leave if you are not careful. And the rest of them are a bit weaker. So occasionally these don't want to come out easily. But we have relatively normal key pins and incredibly deeply spooled mushrooms that we will come back to in a moment. So these drivers are actually the same as what the original locks had. They just had 5 more of these in the other row. This one does things a little bit differently. You may notice that these chambers are huge compared to those ones. These are actually 4mm chambers, same size as multi-lock. And while they aren't pin-in-pin, they have a different trick. And it is quite a good trick at that. So all of the drivers look like this, and we will come back to that in more detail in a moment. And a lot of the key pins are also torpedoed or serrated. Okay, with those out, we can slide the plug out of its housing. So the housing is pretty normal. These 5 huge chambers and 4 more standard-sized ones. And then we get to our plug, so that's where our ball bearing detent sits. Here's where our top right pins go, and here's where our left side pins go. There's also a pin in the back that does not come out super easily. There is our keyway. It's mildly restrictive, but due to the size of the pins, they're big scallops in the warding, so you can work in between those, but you want to be careful that you're not actually hitting one of the little warding bits in between, otherwise you'll just reset everything. So one thing to note here is that there's a rather significant bevel all the way around those chambers, and that is intentional, and in this particular lock, it is helping with security. In most locks, and for instance on this side, it widens the shear line to the point where you can set things more easily. On this side, it acts a little bit differently. So first off, we'll deal with these pins. Nice, sharp, deep mushroom pins, completely flat on the bottom. The key pins are similarly very flat, so there is very little gap between them. And if you're in a false set, those mushrooms can get over under the chambers in the Bible, and you have to manually counter-rotate to set them. So all four of those are the same. So here we have one of the torpedoed key pins with a nice sharp lip at the top, and it is domed on the top. Now normally that would extend the gap in the shear line, but these drivers are matched. They are dished out to the point where it perfectly matches that key pin, and you get essentially no gap at all there. It also acts to center the driver over the key pin, so if you're out in one of those deep false sets and you push down on this, it will attempt to torque that pin down and recenter it, which can cause problems. The really special thing about these drivers is what's above the widest point. Let's see if I can show that. So here we have effectively a reverse T-pin that is stepped. So these sections are the same size, so it is spooled in the middle of a step, and then there is a smaller step at the top. And you can, depending on bitting height, these will start off at any one of these surfaces. So the minimum lifts the minimum lifts start up here and just need to be tapped a tiny bit. The maximum lifts start binding on this little tiny bit up here. So you can start off with a huge false set if you've got everything but the maximum lifts dealt with. And then there's the spooled region. So what was happening is I was popping up into this spool, and as I was lifting this pin, I would get counter-rotation to pop out of that spool, and then as I hit this lip up on the underside of the chamber in the Bible, you completely lose feedback because there's no longer any torque to get this to center over because it is narrower on the top, which means it can tilt in the chamber. Now, that happens on all of these pins. They are all identical, spooled reverse T-pins with a step. You also end up with some of these serrated pins, and those play particularly nicely with this beveling, because the beveling is actually just about exactly the height of this lower step. And because these can tilt in the upper chamber, it means that instead of just resting on this core in a false set, if you come back far enough, that edge will fall into that bevel, it will torque the pin sideways, and because it's narrower at the top, it can tilt, and then that bevel will drive this over and drop the pin. Which means that these can drop significantly earlier in rotation than they can be set. And that can cause all manner of problems depending on how many pins do it. So in this particular lock, 3 and 4 could set things could drop things as far back as number 5, which is what I was setting first or second. So I had to keep going back and attempt to push those as far as possible into the false set to get as stable a position on this plug as I could, such that when I came back, it had already been resting there and the friction would drag it over into the side of the Bible chamber. And even then, it's only a chance that it works. So here's our key one more time. I'll move these slightly because I need a little bit of room here. So I ended up with 6 of these locks. Just happened to be a lot of them. And I figure I should mention how variable these things can be. So the first one I picked was not bad. Didn't take too long, everything seemed like it was, nice, standard, bound in the order, got it open pretty quickly. I was gonna film it, and then decided, no, I should pick the rest, see if anything strange happened. Second one I picked, that's this one. I would say it's bad. This one, if you do not know exactly what the binding order is and pick out of order to get to that deep false set, there is no chance of getting these pins to stay set. This is a difficult lock. I did end up finding one more that was not bad, similar to the first. Then I found this one. Abject Misery. This one has 3 pins that will drop everything back, almost regardless of what you do. I managed to get it open once. It took several hours with tension on it, and the only way I could get it to go was by controlling drops of overset pins, multiple at a time, which is just luck. You overset multiple pins, you attempt to position a pick under one of them at the right height, and then you drop them back and hope. And eventually you can get lucky. And that leaves the last 2. I do not call a lock potentially impossible lightly. In each of these, there are at least 4 pins that will drop everything back before you even get halfway to where you need to get them to release from the underside of the chamber in the Bible. And so while these are, you could certainly pick these with something like a Sputnik, something that deals with multiple pins at a time, I am not entirely convinced that this can be done simply by single pin picking, just because the tolerance at which things will drop back is nowhere close to where you need to be to set the next pin. So you have to be working multiple pins at a time in those. One other thing that I should point out, not all of them use that key and knob style cylinder with the covers, and to save someone else the headache, some of these RA cylinders, so core slides forwards, exposing chambers immediately. If you take out these 2 screws and pull this forwards, there are no covers. They're just springs, and they will come out, and hopefully you can find all the pieces. Which I did for this lock, but use caution if you are gutting some of them, because they are not all exactly the same. Alright, that is the Lockman MegaCross SP. This is what the newer box shows. I think this is slightly different art from the older ones. They don't say SP anywhere on the boxes, but if you go on their company website, that is how they list this model, and they have drawings showing these larger pins. So hopefully more people can find these and see if they can pick them. Hopefully you end up with either one of the not bad cylinders, or one that is in fact pickable, or maybe you'll end up with one of the extremely difficult ones and can figure out a way to do that. It'll be very interesting to see. All right, go close on these one more time. The Lockman MegaCross SP. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.